Kate Laughlin. I'm the Executive Director for the Association for Rural and Small Libraries, or ARSL. In January of 2020, ARSL was at a very pivotal place in its evolution as an organization. It had, until that point, been an entirely volunteer-run organization, as in literally there were people who were working in small and rural libraries who carried ARSL forward for years on their own. I began as ARSL's very first executive director on January 1st of 2020, and at that time, my office where we work became the national office for ARSL, and that was new. They could call the office for support as a small and rural library. So all those pieces were getting put in place in the first quarter of 2020, and when I think back about how advantageous that ended up being, had that not happened in time for the pandemic to hit, not only would we be having a hard time in the office, but those dedicated and really hardworking volunteer leaders who had been carrying the balls all this time would have been facing the pandemic with their day jobs out there in their libraries and trying to figure out how do we sustain this national organization. So I am really grateful to the board who came before, that they had the foresight to get the structure in place to help us weather what has been a very difficult year for everybody, no matter who you are, where you're working or live. We are a member organization, and there's certain benefits to membership within ARSL, but at the heart of the organization, we're there to support small and rural libraries, period, regardless of membership. And that really went into play, not just in the office, but at the leadership level of what do we need to do to support our folks who are in need. And a lot of that came down to information. We were everybody everywhere, just trying to figure out what are we supposed to be doing at a personal level, but within our libraries. Do we need to be disinfecting things? Do materials need to sit for a period of time? And it was hard to find reliable sources of information, which is so important for us to have, because we're then being turned to by our community or by staff or city councils or county governance and look to for reliable information. That's one of the reasons I was really glad that the Realm Project got started, because that became a reliable and regularly being updated source of information, and getting that dispersed out to the small and rural library community became rather essential. It was the go-to information source. I was also really grateful that they thought to give the Association for Rural and Small Libraries a call and ask if we could have a representative serve, and making sure that small and rural library voices were represented at that level and in those conversations. And so I've been pleased to be able to sit on that steering committee. In the short term, we had to do things like we couldn't have an in-person board retreat. We couldn't have, it turned out, an in-person conference in Wichita, Kansas. So we had to adapt those. In the case of the conference, it was initially very sad for everyone. Folks really look forward to that conference every year, seeing old friends and making new ones. But what we found was when we allowed people to pay less and not have to travel and attend the conference online, we had easily double, if not more, the number of attendees that we would have had if we had held it on site. And that was a pretty clear accessibility aha moment for our leadership and for us in the office. So even though we're planning this year for in-person, knocking wood, in Reno Sparks, Nevada in October, we are also planning a virtual component to it, because we felt it was almost a mandate that we continue to allow access to those conferences for those who would otherwise never be able to attend for whatever reason. Another thing that we did in an early response to the pandemic was around the same topic of getting information out to small and rural libraries, not just the membership. And so we held a pretty quick, we pulled it together in March 2020, a facilitated roundtable for a discussion of response to COVID. And it was amazing that 50 people showed up to that. And at the end of that hour, we asked them, is this something that you would like to see happening on a weekly, on a bi-weekly, on a monthly basis? And the chat filled up with weekly. And suddenly we knew we had to do that. And so the office then convened weekly roundtables online. The next week, 100 people showed up. The week after that, 150. And by the time we finally stopped holding them weekly, because Realm had really gotten underway and other good, reliable information sources were available, we were easily seeing 300 to 500 people showing up just at a facilitated informational roundtable, just to swap information, but also to commiserate and to share stories and figure out ways that they were getting by. It was incredible, some of the stories we'd hear about libraries that were turned into child care centers with the staff serving as the child care providers. And that just scratches the surface of some of the ways the small and rural libraries were adapted and used to meet the crises that was underway. The long-term changes within ARSL as a result of this pandemic, they remain to be seen, really, but I know that we're already thinking about how there will be ripples for years to come from this. Staffing shortages, reduced budgets. In some cases, there are libraries that there's a question about whether they will even reopen or when they will reopen. So we're being very mindful that in order for the folks working in small and rural libraries to be able to meet the needs of their communities and the struggles they're facing and the ripples that'll be coming there, our association needs to be ready to support those folks in those emerging ways. I want to point out that ARSL is starting to look at what are the other ways that we can provide support. And so the number of meetings that I'm in anymore with foundations, with really anyone who might be willing to offer grant opportunities, anything like that, we're talking with them. And in fact, if anyone's watching, give me a call, because we know that it's a hard time out in the libraries. And whether it's that they need to buy a few more hotspots to be able to lend out in a library school partnership program that they're co-sponsoring, or whether it's fixing the leaky roof on the library facility, there's just an unending list of needs in the small and rural libraries, and usually not enough funding. So that is something that, as we look forward coming out of the pandemic, we already knew the need was out there, and it's only been amped up by the crisis that's been underway. So that'll be a big focus for ARSL, and certainly for me as executive director. I think one of the biggest, and I think it'll turn out to be best things that came out of this, is that for years, our libraries were very aware of the digital divide. And so that's one good thing, I think, that has come out of the pandemic, is that everybody experienced that. And it really was no longer a small or rural issue. You could be in an urban area and you may have had some strong internet, but not when you're in competition with your roommates or your multiple children trying to attend school and your partner and you trying to work. The level that that's brought to the country's attention and to the powers that be, I think we'll see things start to get better a lot sooner than they might have otherwise.